When I moved to the suburbs, I was mostly just trying to escape the noise, the traffic, and the guy who thought playing the recorder at 2 a.m. was an acceptable form of artistic expression. I found a quiet little cul-de-sac with birds chirping, squirrels doing whatever shady business squirrels do, and neighbors who waved a little too enthusiastically, like they had something to prove. At first, it was perfect. The lawn was green, the mortgage was tolerable, and nobody had screamed obscenities at me in a week. A personal record. My next-door neighbor, a retired mailman named Jenkins, gave me a pie and a warning in the same breath. "Careful with the one across the street," he said, nodding toward a perfectly trimmed head shaped like an eagle or possibly a middle finger. "Karen, HOA president. She knows everything before it happens. Swear she's got satellites up there." I laughed. I shouldn't have laughed. You know how people say you don't choose your neighbors? Yeah, I didn't choose Karen. But if I had, it would have been the exact opposite of her, a quiet, reclusive gardener maybe. Someone who thinks passive aggression is still too aggressive. Karen, though, Karen was born to manage. Clipboard always in hand, hair shellacked into what I can only describe as helmet mode, and a mouth permanently set to confrontational. Within the first week, I got my first HOA violation. "Your lawn is 1.2 inches too long." I stared at the paper. I stared at my lawn. I stared at the sky, hoping maybe a meteor would end my suffering. Instead, I trimmed the grass. Because that's what you do when someone threatens you with a $200 fine over blades of grass. Then came the recycling bin citation. Apparently, it wasn't turned precisely to a 45-degree angle at the curb. I considered buying a protractor and mailing it to her anonymously, but I restrained myself. For a while, I thought she was just obsessively controlling. Type A on steroids. But then something started to feel off. She made comments. Strange ones. "You might want to move that tool set from your back porch. Looks a bit cluttered." Except, I hadn't posted a photo, and the porch was behind my house. No windows faced that direction. No way she could see it from the street unless she had drones or teleportation. I shrugged it off the first time. Maybe she saw it from a weird angle or just guessed. But it kept happening. Details only someone with direct line of sight could know. Like the fact I left a bag of potting soil unsealed. Or that I left the garden hose dribbling water one morning when I ran inside for coffee and forgot about it. Coincidence? Maybe. But when your neighbor starts describing the exact layout of your backyard furniture, you start to wonder if she's running a side hustle as a peeping Tom. One night, I stepped outside to grab my hoodie. I'd left it draped over the railing during the day. It was late, around 11. Quiet. Still. And then movement. I froze. There, bobbing slightly over the wooden fence like the world's nosiest meerkat, was a blonde helmet of hair. Karen. I saw her eyes scanning my backyard like she was the suburban Batman, watching for crime or misplaced decorative rocks. Karen. The helmet disappeared like it had been yanked by a fishing line. I stood there stunned. Part of me wanted to believe it had been a hallucination brought on by too much Home Depot air freshener. But no, I knew what I saw. I walked over to the fence and looked. Nothing. No footprints. No apology note. No sanity left in my head. Next morning, I knocked on her door. She opened it with that ever-present smirk and a sweater that screamed, "I call the manager recreationally." "Karen, were you in my backyard last night?" Her eyes widened like I'd accused her of arson. "Excuse me. I saw you, peeking over the fence." She scoffed. "Why on earth would I be interested in your backyard?" I stared at her. "Good question." She leaned forward just slightly. "Unless you have something to hide, of course." That was it. That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with a normal HOA president. I was dealing with someone who thought property lines were suggestions and privacy was optional. I said nothing, just nodded and walked away. Later that week, it happened again. This time, she was crouching behind her trash bins, clearly trying to angle herself for a better view of my flower beds. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell. I just stared at her for a solid 10 seconds until she noticed and bolted like I'd caught her siphoning my Wi-Fi. That night, I made a trip to the hardware store. I wasn't just installing cameras. No, Karen wanted a front row seat to my backyard business. Fine. But she was going to get more than she bargained for. I bought ultraviolet paint, the kind they use to mark counterfeit money. Invisible under normal light. Glows under UV. Non-toxic, waterproof, and impossible to explain away when you're glowing like a rave kid in 2008. I coated the top of the fence carefully. Just a thin layer where someone might put their hands to peek over. Subtle. Perfect. The cameras were set up to cover the backyard, corners, and, most importantly, the fence line. Motion activated, high def, night vision. Because if I was going to catch Karen, I was going to catch her in 4K Ultra Karen vision. Now I just had to wait. And I didn't have to wait long. The thing about setting traps is patience. You can't look too eager. You have to pretend like you're not watching, not expecting anything. Just out there living your best peaceful, HOA oppressed life. I watered my plants like normal, cleaned my grill, even left a slightly crooked garden gnome out just to bait her. The thing was tilted like it was winking at her. Because it was. Karen, of course, didn't disappoint. 3 nights later, at exactly 12:42 a.m., timestamp courtesy of my brand new security system, the cameras picked up movement near the fence. I had my phone beside me, watching live like it was the suburban version of a true crime series. There she was, dressed in black, no less. Black yoga pants, black hoodie, black gloves, which she took off before grabbing the top of the fence. Because you can't really spy on someone with gloves on. That would be unethical. She hoisted herself up, her face illuminated just enough by the faint porch light to capture that distinct expression of concentrated judgment. She held that position for a while, scanning like a hawk who moonlights as a Karen. And she definitely touched the top of the fence. Twice. I saw her shift positions and even adjust her stance by putting more pressure on the very spot I'd painted. I watched like a proud parent at a kindergarten recital. Except instead of applause, I was ready to call the cops. Which I did. 911. What's your emergency? Yeah, hi. My HOA president is currently spying on me from over my fence. I have it on camera. Again, there was a pause. The kind that says, we get this call more than we should. How do you know she's spying? I have video. And I may or may not have painted my fence with invisible UV reactive dye. Another pause. Officers will be dispatched shortly. By the time the squad car rolled up, lights off, quiet like a suburban ghost, Karen had just started to climb down. But the headlights flicked on at the perfect moment. She froze mid-crouch, like a raccoon caught red-handed in someone's garbage bin. Then she bolted. Not brisk walk away in denial bolted. I mean full sprints across the lawn in socks, scrambling like her reputation was physically on fire. The cops got out slowly. Not because they weren't in a rush, but because they knew exactly what kind of situation this was. And they were going to enjoy every second. I met them at the curb, still in my hoodie and slippers, holding a flashlight like it was Excalibur. Evening, gentlemen, I said. You missed the live performance, but I've got the highlight reel right here. I handed them my phone. She climbed the fence. No gloves. Made contact with the rail. That's UV reactive dye. You'll see. As they watched the footage, Karen's curtains twitched. Once. Twice. Then they stilled. Clearly she knew the game was up. But I was just getting started. They knocked. Firmly. Nothing. Knocked again. She opened the door halfway, wearing a bathrobe and the expression of someone who'd just been accused of war crimes. What seems to be the problem, officers? She asked, her voice saccharine enough to cause a cavity. We've received a complaint from your neighbor regarding trespassing and surveillance, one officer said. He has video evidence. Would you like to respond? Karen blinked. For a full second, her brain blue-screened. That's ridiculous, she said. That's a fabrication. A digital deepfake. I am a respected member of this community. Sure, I said, stepping forward slightly. Then you wouldn't mind showing your hands. She flinched. What? Your hands, I repeated. Just humor me. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she held them out. Palms up. I clicked on my UV flashlight and shone it over her hands. They lit up like they'd been dipped in radioactive glitter. Her face morphed. First confusion, then horror, then that familiar Karen expression. Indignation crossed with desperation. She yanked her hands back. That proves nothing. It could be pollen. The cop next to me chuckled. Pollen glows now. She turned to him. Are you taking his side? He's new here. We're taking the side of the footage, ma'am. And the glowing paint. And the fact you fled the scene like a guilty cat. I'm telling you, it was all a setup. I've been framed. Ma'am, the officer said, stepping forward, you need to come with us. Karen backed up like a cartoon character approaching the edge of a cliff. This is an outrage. I am the president of this HOA. And now, I said with the most sincere smirk I've ever smirked, you're the lead in a cautionary tale. As they cuffed her, gently, because she was still flailing about her status, I noticed movement across the street. Sprinklers turned on. Dogs were walked. Shrubs were trimmed with an intensity rarely seen after midnight. It was like the entire neighborhood had just so happened to be outside at this exact moment. I saw Jenkins leaning on his rake, shaking his head with a grin that could only be described as satisfied elder vengeance. Karen was escorted to the patrol car, muttering the whole way about lawsuits, conspiracies, and something about weaponized botany. And me? I stood on my porch, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and petty victory. This wasn't just about spying anymore. It was about justice, about boundaries, literal and figurative, and about making sure the next time someone tried to peep over my fence, they at least brought gloves. By the time the police cruiser rolled away, Karen's screams were muffled by closed windows and the dull hum of victory. Her porch light still flickered behind her like it couldn't decide whether to mourn or celebrate. The best part? No one went back inside. The whole block turned into a late-night block party powered entirely by schadenfreude. Jenkins, still leaning on his rake like it was a royal scepter, shuffled over with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who'd waited years for this exact moment. He looked at me with all the solemnity of a judge announcing a verdict. How, he whispered. How did you defeat the dragon? I smiled, flicked off my UV flashlight, and holstered it like I'd just finished dueling in the Wild West. Nothing special, I said. Just a couple of cameras and a little special paint. For especially entitled people. The man wheezed. I'm not even sure it was a laugh or the sound of a soul being cleansed. Either way, he clapped me on the shoulder with a force that might have qualified as assault under different circumstances. A few more neighbors drifted over. Hector from 2 doors down, who always wore socks with sandals and had never spoken more than 5 words to me, and Marlene, the retired florist who once threatened to sue a squirrel for eating her tulips. She handed me a cookie without saying a word. A silent, buttery thank you. I heard someone mutter, about time, and someone else say, do you think she'll resign? As if Karen's downfall were now the central plot of a very juicy soap opera. Which, to be fair, it was. As the crowd began to disperse, a few people stayed behind, quietly trimming hedges or wiping down mailboxes that didn't need wiping. Not because they cared about cleanliness. No, this was ritual cleansing. The HOA had lost its high priestess, and the block needed to spiritually realign. By noon the next day, everyone knew. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word, but somehow the footage had mysteriously circulated. Maybe one of the cops had a sense of humor. Maybe Jenkins was secretly a Reddit mod. I didn't ask questions. What I did do was mow my lawn. Carefully. Precisely. To the exact, regulation length. And then I put a tiny sign next to it that read, HOA compliant. Approved by Karen's tears. It lasted about 5 hours before someone took it. I didn't mind. I had backups. Karen, meanwhile, was suspiciously quiet. Her house looked off. The blinds stayed shut. The porch light didn't come on. No mail disappeared from her box for 2 days. Jenkins swore he saw her peek out once, but no one could confirm. She'd gone full cryptid. I figured the legal process would take time. Maybe a fine. Maybe community service. Maybe she'd be sentenced to live in a non-HOA neighborhood for a year. You know, real punishment for her. But what I didn't expect, what none of us expected, was what came next. Exactly 4 days after the fence-peeping fiasco, a letter arrived in every mailbox on the block. Typed. Formal. Stamped with the HOA letterhead that once filled us all with dread. Dear residents. Effective immediately, Karen H. is resigning from her position as president of the Oak Ridge Neighborhood HOA. We thank her for her years of service and wish her well in her future endeavors. Sincerely, Oak Ridge HOA Vice President, Diane. I had nothing to do with this, McIntyre. The tone was neutral, sterile, as if the paper itself didn't want to get involved. But Diane walked her dog by my place that evening and said, "You have no idea how long we've all been waiting for this." Then she slipped me a coupon for a free pizza and walked off whistling. The shift was immediate. The passive-aggressive warning notes stopped. The weekly HOA emails dropped from 14 bullet points to a polite, "Hope you're enjoying spring." People smiled more. Lawn chairs appeared on porches again, like they were finally allowed to exist. And then someone organized a block party. An actual, honest-to-God, backyard, grilled corn, bring-your-own-beer block party. Of course, they insisted I come. Guest of honor, they said. Hero of the fence. Someone even made a t-shirt with a cartoon Karen glowing under a UV light. I wore it. That party? That was the sound of a neighborhood exhaling. Long games. Dogs off leash. Marlene got wine drunk and confessed she once keyed Karen's car on accident. Jenkins told me about the time Karen tried to fine him for having decorative rocks too emotionally chaotic. There were speeches. Toasts. Someone brought a karaoke machine, and Hector belted out, "We are the champions," in a surprisingly competent baritone. And in that moment, as the sun set and the fairy lights blinked to life, I realized something strange. This place, this HOA-infested, regulation-riddled suburban jungle, had finally become mine. All it took was a little surveillance, some invisible paint, and a well-timed flashlight. And the end of a Karen. Karen's fall wasn't just loud, it echoed. After the resignation letter, the HOA meetings became normal, boring even, which, in HOA terms, is the equivalent of winning the lottery. Diane, vice president turned president by default, held the first post-Karen meeting in her driveway, complete with donuts and absolutely zero threats of lawn violation fines. For the first time, people showed up voluntarily. And they didn't come armed with complaints or grudges or 14-year-old passive-aggressive vendettas written on monogram stationery. They brought folding chairs, coffee. Someone even brought a guitar. Diane stood up and said, "Let's try doing this like human beings for a while," and nobody objected. Karen, however, remained conspicuously silent. She had gone full ghost mode. Her porch light never came back on. The eagle-shaped hedge had grown slightly lopsided. For someone who used to measure sidewalk chalk drawings for HOA compliance, it was practically a cry for help. Every once in a while, someone would spot her through a window. The curtains would twitch, but that was it. No more slow cruises in her beige SUV. No more early morning clipboard patrols. The ecosystem had finally righted itself. Until one Monday morning, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. It was glorious. It wasn't a tasteful little sign either. It was a giant, double-sided LED backlit monstrosity that blinked motivated seller every 3 seconds. It clashed with her beige siding like a neon nightclub had parked itself on her driveway. She didn't even try to hide it. Didn't post on the HOA forums. No farewell speech. No goodbye cookies. She just folded. I heard from Jenkins, who hears everything, that the HOA board offered her an amicable exit package, which was probably just a fancy way of saying, "Please leave, and we promise never to speak of this again." Honestly, fair deal. As the house sat on the market, we saw a parade of prospective buyers shuffle through. Couples, retirees, confused single dads who looked like they'd gotten lost trying to find Costco. Each time, Karen's silhouette was visible behind the curtains. Watching, judging, fading. One guy actually knocked on my door. "Hey," he said, "we're looking at the house across the street. Anything we should know?" I smiled. "Oh, just the usual," I said. "Squirrels are aggressive. HOA's under new management." "Oh, and the previous owner may have been arrested for nighttime surveillance and glowing like a radioactive smurf." The guy blinked. Cool. I never saw him again. Eventually, someone bought it. Some tech consultant and his boyfriend. They came with 2 cats, a German shepherd named Waffles, and a box labeled Anti-Karen Defense Kit, which, I'll be honest, earned them my eternal respect before they even unpacked. Karen didn't say goodbye. The moving truck came early on a Thursday. She stood on her porch, arms folded, watching as the last box was loaded. Jenkins and I happened to be raking leaves across the street, and by raking, I mean just standing there holding rakes like stage props. She looked over once. No nod, no smile, just that hard, frozen expression, equal parts rage, humiliation, and the sour tang of defeated entitlement. I gave her a little wave. She turned away. The truck pulled out of the driveway, and just like that, she was gone. We all kind of stood there for a moment. Not celebrating. Not yet. Just processing. Then Jenkins said, "It's like when Voldemort died and the air felt lighter." And just like that, we threw another party. This one was unofficial, of course. No HOA approval needed anymore. People brought actual grills into their front yards. There were tiki torches. Lawn chairs formed weird, spontaneous circles. Kids tore up the sidewalks on scooters like the Geneva Conventions had been suspended. And me? I got called fence guy for the next 3 weeks. Someone even tried to start a rumor that I was ex-CIA, which I did not confirm. One evening, a few days after Karen's final disappearance, Jenkins handed me an envelope. Inside, a handmade thank you card signed by half the block, including one written in crayon by a 5-year-old that said, "Thank you for making the scary lady go away. My mom says you're like Batman." I still have that card. Framed, right above the now famous fence. The one with just a faint, almost invisible trace of UV paint still left on the top. Just in case. By the time the block had officially declared Karen's old house a safe zone, the transformation of our suburban battlefield was complete. The once silent street was now full of life. Lawns still looked neat, but not like they'd been manicured by a military drone strike. Kids had sidewalk chalk murals that hadn't been scrubbed off in under 6 hours. And people, actual people, waved at each other without scanning for rule infractions. It was nice. Weird, sure. I mean, this was still the kind of neighborhood where people put up live, laugh, love signs unironically. But it was alive. Diane, the new HOA president who, as it turned out, hated the job but hated Karen more, approached me during one of our very legally informal cookouts. "We're rewriting the HOA charter," she said. "First draft bans night vision binoculars and mandates at least one act of kindness per month." I raised an eyebrow. She sipped her drink. "Okay, maybe 2. But we're keeping it casual." Word spread. More people started showing up at the newly casual HOA gatherings, often held on porches with beer instead of in meeting halls with blood pressure medication. People brought ideas. Actual good ones. Like a community garden. Shared tool library. Someone even pitched Suburban Fight Club, but we voted that one down on account of legal liability and Jenkins's brittle hip. Still, the fact that the conversation even happened? Progress. And then, there was the party. The official Karen is gone thank the lawn gods celebration. Jenkins planned it, of course. Called it the Freedom from Fences Festival, which made no sense, but nobody cared. There was a banner. There were 3 bounce houses, 2 piñatas shaped like clipboards, and 1 barbecue so massive we had to borrow Hector's cousin's industrial smoker. Jenkins handed out little Karen masks so people could dramatically toss them into a bonfire. Someone played Hit the Clipboard with water balloons. There was even a raffle, and I won a lawn flamingo that looked suspiciously smug. Midway through the night, as the sky dimmed and laughter filled the air, someone tapped a fork against a glass. A hush fell over the street. Jenkins stood in the middle of it all, dressed like he was officiating a royal wedding. Button-down shirt, suspenders, and an apron that said Grill Sergeant. He cleared his throat. "Neighbors," he said, raising his glass. "We are gathered here today to celebrate a true hero." I tried to hide behind a cooler, but it was too late. He pointed at me like he was about to knight me with a spatula. This man moved into our neighborhood, mowed his lawn like a law-abiding citizen, and was harassed for crimes such as slightly off-center mulch. Laughter. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He didn't file a passive-aggressive Facebook rant. No, he did what all of us dreamed of doing. He fought back, with science. Cheers. Someone actually yelled nerd power in the back. He caught the dragon. And he didn't just slay her, He made her glow. More laughter. Someone sprayed beer out their nose. The inflatable clipboard piñata finally gave out with a satisfying pop. Jenkins raised his glass again. To the man who ended tyranny with a flashlight and a bucket of invisible paint. Our hero, our fence whisperer, our lord of the lawn. And then, he added with a mischievous twinkle. But I do have one complaint. The crowd quieted, leaning in. I braced. Jenkins looked straight at me, eyes full of that veteran suburban mischief. Why? He said. Didn't you move here sooner? The roar of laughter that followed nearly set off the car alarms. Someone hit a party popper. Waffles, the German shepherd, barked twice in approval. I took a bow, because at that point, what else could I do? And right there, under strings of twinkly lights and the scent of grilled freedom, it really hit me. This street, these weirdos, this chaotic slice of cul-de-sac heaven, they were mine now. I started as just another guy with a moving truck and a dream of a quiet life. But sometimes, to get peace, you've got to wage a little war. And sometimes, you've got to paint your fence with UV-reactive chemicals just to prove a point. Karen never came back. Last we heard, she moved to a condo downtown. No lawn. No fences. Probably lots of security cameras pointed at everyone else. The house she left behind now has a pink flamingo, a community garden in progress, and a tiny plaque by the fence that says, "Here stood the great Karen, defeated by paint, camera, and pure suburban pettiness." People take selfies with it. I sleep just fine. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.